look, we have the book that was originally What Would the Rockefellers Do? Now, What Would Billionaires Do? Mm-hmm. And, before I got it, Matt Silverstein, the CMO and my partner in Wealth Factory involved, I moved some copies. But I had been at it for a while writing other books. Now I think maybe had moved 7,000, maybe 10,000 copies. But then the first year that he got involved, I think there was like 35,000 copies that were sold. So it was a collaboration because he has skill sets and thought processes and formats and ideas and testing and research that helps, get that out there that I'm not really built for. Money can be complicated. Let a nerd help you. We're here to demystify the complex nature of money by getting you answers from financial nerds and whiz kids. Welcome to Ask the Money Nerds, a weekly segment of the Wealth Labs podcast where we answer your most pressing money questions. Do you have content inside of you that you want to profit from? To cash flow from helping others? Is marketing something that you're unsure of and just don't know where to start? Or is cash tight and you just want to build and produce something but don't quite have the money right now? Where's your market? How do you find people? And how can you invest in something that is meaningful to you and helpful to the world? Well, we actually have two questions that relate to this today, Stolba.
Yeah, we're going to double up today. Yeah, nice to see you too. I think, so Josh and David's questions are going to be combined for this episode today because they're both around generating ideas, developing intellectual property around that, and then how do you actually share your ideas with the world? And I can resonate with this question because I'm a person full of ideas. I don't know if you've experienced that in me.
You're a quick start if people take the Kolbe, Kolbe, aren't you? Mm-hmm. And I'm a quick start. That's dangerous to put two quick starts together.
Yeah, but I have a healthy dose of like fact checker in me too. So it kind of slows me down a little bit.
I learned about that because my wife's high on the fact checker side. So I bring ideas, give her books, let her research it, and then tell me whether we should move forward with it, with its health or whatever it might be.
Yeah, you make a good team in that way. But
we're a pretty good team, huh?
I think so. Yeah. I'd call us an A team.
Yeah.
A plus team.
Cool.
A team. Yeah.
B minus.
No. Yeah. You got some work to do. A B minus is close to a C.
I know you're a teacher. That just like really triggered you.
Yeah.
If you're not first, you're last, Stolba. Just kidding.
If you're not a winner, you're a loser. No.
Oh, that's great.
So, this is a great question because I honestly don't believe people are short on ideas. Mm-hmm. I think that's the great thing about humanity is we have new ideas and we love to refine things and create and that's our power. But the place where so many of us get stuck and where I've gotten stuck in my life is on implementation, the how, and how do you get people to be interested in your product. And so we're gonna talk about that today and answer two of the questions. So hang with me here. We got a lot of content, but Josh wrote in and he knows that you've talked about investor DNA and building intellectual property. And you've done that a lot with
quickly
all of your
investor
books.
DNA is your values with your core competencies and core drivers, which makes you interested in something and have the ability to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And then when you invest in things that make sense based upon your assessment and your knowledge so that you can reduce your risk. And then intellectual property is just mental capital. It's your ideas, knowledge, wisdom, insight, strategies, and tools. And when you can package that in a way that someone else could benefit from it, hopefully like we're doing here with this video, some type of how-to, then that could become intellectual property. Obviously, we know real property like real estate, but intellectual property is something that's less tangible initially, but those ideas can actually improve people's lives. So intellectual property is an investment.
Does everybody have the ability to develop IP? Because a lot of it seems like at least maybe an old school thought is I've done this research over many, many years and now that has become IP.
I think that everybody's got ideas. Whether or not those ideas are meant to be sold or to be packaged is a different thing. Like some people are really called to write a book. We're kind of in a phase of life where people are writing books to become a business card more than a guide that really gives you all the answers sometimes. So there's that distinction. And sometimes it's YouTube channels. We see those popping up all the time. And, people can learn so much from YouTube to figure out how to, I've used it to change a door lock. You know how handy I am. So I need definitely some support on that. So, there's that. And some people are doing this just because it's a hobby. Other people are doing it because it's part of their income. And so there's those distinctions of like, what's your purpose behind it? So just because we have an idea doesn't mean that that idea needs to be packaged up, put into a book, put into a video, sold, created a business behind that, because it just may not be compelling enough for the individual that has the idea. And I also feel that not all ideas that we have need to be explored or need to be implemented. Like, you know how many ideas we have all the time.
Yeah.
And we always have this parking lot that we can put those ideas in and say, maybe those are for us, maybe not. We're thinking about capacity. We're thinking about quality of life. We're thinking about, really what the execution would look like, what it would look like from a financial standpoint and the bandwidth of the team. So, whether or not this is the right route for you, I think that, Rich Christensen's book, Bootstrap Business, has some really good insights of whether or not you're built to be a business owner. Because look, if all we had was entrepreneurs, we better have some robots that are supporting those entrepreneurs to get those ideas out there, because sometimes entrepreneurs are great at ideas. They're not as good as execution. And it's great to have intrapreneurs behind that. People that go, I want to work within an organization so that I have infrastructure and I have support and I can be part of a team. And so, those are just a few of my initial thoughts on this.
Yeah, it sounds like we all have ideas. Some of them are meant to be turned into a business. But others, I think ideas, it's okay just to have them, to float around in your head, to occupy your mind, to begin thinking creatively, to make life more enjoyable, and to remind us that we can develop new things, so it doesn't necessarily have to be what you build your livelihood upon. It can just be something that is enjoyable for you to explore.
I write poems. But those are sometimes for my wife or for myself. It's not something that I'm out there publishing or putting in books necessarily, but pieces of those go into keynotes that I'm writing or one-man show or things like that. So I find like sometimes the best thing to do is you create a hobby that's just enjoyable, that fulfills you. And sometimes that might develop past that, or maybe it doesn't. On the shelf over here, I got a bunch of whiskey, which I don't drink really anymore. So, but I'm a whiskey somm. That's not a business for me. That's just something that I enjoy doing and taking people through that tasting. So that gives us a connection and a conversation. I'm an amateur barista. Nobody's ever paid me for it. I get a lot of compliments on it. I just love to serve lattes, but those are just things that I like to do for fun. But when it comes to dissecting money, when it comes to writing comedy, when it comes to writing material for a keynote, those are things that those other hobbies help me get into a space to create, right? And so they're kind of like a catalyst, but they're not the actual thing itself. Yeah.
Okay. So as to delineate here, if you're a person full of ideas and you like to create, delineate between, is this something that's bringing me pleasure and I just wanted to have it as a hobby? Or if you're wanting to turn it into a business, this is where we're going to get into the question.
Okay. Yeah, let's do this.
Okay. So my question is about how to create cash flow from intellectual property. And he says you've mentioned pre-selling copies of your books. How did you get access to an audience to offer the pre-sell to? I suppose my question is really about marketing. I've always struggled with marketing, and I think I'm not alone. Many people create valuable things, but don't understand how to present them to the market or present them to the right people or in the right way to create cash flow. Mm-hmm. For instance, I wrote a book last year. It's a short little illustrated thing called You Are Enough, just meant to encourage those struggling with self-esteem and mental health issues.
Nice.
I spent hundreds of hours writing and then designing. Then I published it through Amazon and listed it there. But when it comes to marketing, I've really just struggled with that. I've tried Facebook, Pinterest, and Instagram ads, and I've sold a few copies over the last year and a half, but mostly to friends and family, and I don't think any of them came from the ads. Okay. So my question is, I guess I just want to know, how do you market and sell something that you've created? How did you find the audience to pre-sell to? And what if you are just really bad at marketing?
Right.
So I know there are many tutorials and lots of information online about it. This person's watched lots of the videos.
Okay.
But I wonder if it's so far out of my investor DNA that I just struggle to grasp it. I mean, it really stresses me out. Can a person who is terrible at marketing still sell a product?
Well, look, we have the book that was originally What Would the Rockefellers Do? Now, What Would Billionaires Do? Mm-hmm. And, before I got it, Matt Silverstein, the CMO and my partner in Wealth Factory, involved. I moved some copies. But I had been at it for a while writing other books. Now I think maybe had moved 7,000, maybe 10,000 copies. But then the first year that he got involved, I think there was like 35,000 copies that were sold. So it was a collaboration because he has skill sets and thought processes and formats and ideas and testing and research that helps, get that out there that I'm not really built for. So let's go back to earlier than that when I wrote Killing Sacred Cows.
Yeah.
First book. At the time it was completed, I think I had 6,000 people in my database. Right. So it's not like a substantial database, especially not to hit New York Times or to do a lot of pre-selling necessarily. But what I found was, who are the people that would benefit from the book the most? And where I really saw the multiplier effect or the leverage was that financial advisors that liked the philosophy that I had. There were several that were like, oh, that's the book I should have written. And, but you beat me to the punch. And I was like, well, great. I wrote it. Maybe I can help you. And I did. If they bought 100 copies, I do a teleseminar for them and their clients that they sent the 100 copies to. That was back in the days of teleseminars versus Zooms and all that. And then if someone bought 250 copies, I had an 8-part series that they were able to get with this letter that would go out to their clients so that they could use that as a tool to start conversations and to help do more business. And then if they bought 500 copies, I would show up and do a keynote. And so even though I didn't have a huge database, I found ways that who would get a lot of value from this book and identified the multiplier relationships, what I would call catalysts, that wanted to buy a lot of copies.
Yeah.
Right. There's still people that come up and ask Trisha on our team, like, hey, is there a discount if I buy a lot of copies? I want to get this for a mastermind. And we do sell those direct and do that. And so still make money on that book. And then I actually got a co-publisher for that book, which means I had to come up with money for that. So that might not be feasible for everybody, but they actually get distribution. So they go out there and they do co-ops where we get it into bookstores and airport bookstores and those kind of things. And, they have a marketing department to help get ads, and they've done a really good job selling Killing Sacred Cows on Kindle this year. We've actually made a decent, not a huge amount of money, but this book is from 2008.
Right.
So when I self-published it, it just cost me money because I printed 5,000 copies to get a little bit of a price break. I was 800 some copies in as far as selling it just by speaking at events and just by people that, knew me essentially in the small database. And then I met someone that, Michael, and he was like, hey, I know how to help people, really market their book. And he taught me so much about marketing. And that's how we ended up getting this co-publisher and getting it on the bookshelves. And because it was a lot of money, I had to do the pre-sale. I had to sell the books ahead of time. So the first thing was, who would want to buy extra books? We identified that. We identified the things that I would do. We even created bonuses. Back in those days, CDs and DVDs that they could get for buying it before the book was even out. And so all of a sudden, we're building up a bigger database that way. I've never written an ad to sell a book. I've never paid directly for an ad. That has always been marketers that I collaborated with.
Yeah.
That they had that expertise, and then we created those formats. And they even helped me kind of, what are we going to say in the video and how are we going to say it, and testing those kind of things. So if you find someone that would be willing to work on performance because they're an advocate for the book, that's how I always started. Who loved the book? Who felt like this was a book that they just wanted to get into people's hands and it really impacted their life? And that's what really helped out, is people that enjoyed it became kind of my advocates for that. So that's one piece of it as well. So you got to find the right person. And I always feel like for every hour I work on the book, if I want it to do well, there's going to be at least 10 hours of everyone's support to market the book. And usually when I wrote that first one, I was like, I'm never going to write another book. That was so excruciating and painful and difficult. Even when it got published, we rewrote the whole thing so it had better word of mouth and the reader had better experience, and thinking about how we get them to actually engage with it, not just buy it and have it sit on a shelf. And that took an extraordinary amount of effort. But the mistake that I would look back and say I made with Killing Sacred Cows is it could have had a lot more life to it if I would have used that same amount of energy that I put in writing it. That's why the book that now I'm working on, that is, I don't know what version we're on now at this point. I mean, it's at least version 3, but it might be more like version 5, where I've had it fully written, fully edited. And I go, no, I'm going to simplify. I'm going to make it more accessible. We're going to bring in, collaborate with other people to figure out how this can just really be the most impactful book when it comes to finance of the next decade. And I'm just prepared that we're going to continue with getting that out there and getting that into people's hands and thinking about the marketing. And I don't have all those answers. So I'm looking for the people, and have found those people that I know that can get that there.
Yeah, I think that's an important point is collaboration. Sometimes when you're the creator, it's hard to do the logistics and the marketing and the advertising and all of that. So it's a good reminder to collaborate. And sometimes it's hard when you're starting out and you're not making a lot of money off of your product yet, but having copies that you can give to people for free so they have access to it and then can be your advocate either on social media or, hey, I know this, program where, we could maybe incorporate your text into a part of the mentorship program. For some reason, the Boys and Girls Club came to mind. So I don't know about this person's book, but a title, You Are Enough. I think a lot of children and youth could benefit from that. So if you can get into programs.
You've got to know your market.
Yes.
Like you've really got to know who your reader is and you got to write the book to that reader. When you try to appeal to too many people, it appeals to almost nobody. It's got to really get clear. And Ray Bard, who did my book with Nick Halleck, 5-Day Weekend, has this model where he's like, hey, there's the ocean, there's the well, like that it's really narrow and deep and keeps providing water. There's the swamp where it's overfilled. Yeah. And so we got really clear we were going for the well, like we're going for deep down, it keeps flowing, keeps providing water. It's like exactly what you're getting. Like you got to really understand that customer. And then when you have those advocates and catalysts that are that customer, man, they become a megaphone for you. Yeah. And it's really about that type of impact. So Killing Sacred Cows was the first one. And then we just, when we did the next book, I did a collaboration on a book called Portal to Genius, which was a sequel to The Jackrabbit Factor, which I had nothing to do with that book. And it did really well through word of mouth and through stories. And when I read it, I was like, wow, this is very simple and impactful. And people are more likely to read this cover to cover than my book. And so the authors, the main author, Leslie and her husband, Trevin, they became clients. And in working with them, they're like, I think we're ready to write the sequel. We're going to wait 13 years. But, if we could collaborate. So I gave her ideas, she wrote, and then we just found ways. I mean, that book did extraordinarily well. But that wasn't published. It was just because she had a following because of the first book. And the first book started to take off and she was doing, she was showing up and doing speaking. And the first time I met them, I went to one of their events in my backyard in Salt Lake City and it was just chock full of people and they were super excited. They were avid readers of the first book. So who is that reader? How do you get it in their hands? And then allow them to be a spokesperson for you.
Yeah. And whether it was Killing Sacred Cows or the example that you just gave, once you build the system for one product or service, you keep building upon that for your next.
Yeah,
right?
we've tweaked quite a bit from. Yeah. I mean, like when we did 5-Day Weekend, we had what were called galleys, and they're paperback version of it that we would get in the hands of influencers. Like in between Killing Sacred Cows and Portal to Genius, the next thing I did was New Rules to Get Rich with Nightingale Conant. And Nightingale Conant agreed in our agreement that I could get 100 of these, it was a big audio program. I sent it to 100 influencers. And, those are people that I knew that had followings and that ultimately if they talked about it or interviewed me, that it would really bring attention to that. So I've moved a lot of books through podcasts. I haven't really moved a lot through radio shows. So you saw with 5-Day Weekend, I was like, I'm done doing most radio shows. Maybe there's some still out there, but podcast people aren't just listening to me for 2 or 3 minutes on some soundbite with some media pitch. It's like I'm having a full interview and I did things like giving away a chapter or 2 chapters so that now they're engaged in the database and I can start communicating with them because people maybe aren't going to buy that first time, especially not after 3 minutes. But if I could give them something of value, of real value, and they're going, hey, if this is valuable, then I'm willing to part with $20 or whatever it might be. Or, we've done with Budgeting Sucks, like, hey, grab it for $3, budgetingsucks.com. You can go there and see the funnel. It's like, okay, you pay $3. If you want the audio version of it, then it's another $3. So for $6, you've got Budgeting Sucks in a digital format and in an audio format. And you know what? The title makes a huge difference. Budgeting Sucks has not been a runaway. Like it hasn't done as well as What Would Billionaires Do? And I actually spent a lot more time on that book. I really feel, better in some ways about that book. I think they both have their place. One is very strategy oriented towards one specific thing with What Would Billionaires Do? The other one is a bigger picture book about how you handle your finances and automate what you're up to. But each one is a little bit different, but it really comes down to like, if you don't find the right people and if you don't collaborate with them, like I would have had a bunch of books sitting in my garage essentially, which a lot of authors end up doing.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, one thing that I've seen people do who are just starting off writing or creating art, whatever it is, you know, I follow someone who takes pictures, they take their illustrations and drip them out on social media with little quotes from their book or something. And so it's just small things over time that begin to accumulate and give people a taste for your work and make them thirsty for more. And it does, you know, some things take off and some things take a long onboarding process. It just takes time and generating, you know, a following.
And look, I got a lot of education. I went to Book Publishing 2.0 twice. I hosted it once. You know, like when I spoke recently, what was like 2 years ago at Ryan Levesque's event, like he has so many methodologies that could be applied to books and very well thought out. I actually endorsed one of his books, which, you know me, I only endorse what I read, but I was like, this is a great blueprint. You know, I went through Scribe's 2-day workshop just before COVID hit, actually. And, you know, AJ Harper, who is fantastic, and she's got an entire book writing process. To me, like, a book is judged by its cover. I mean, Ray Bard taught me that, and we saw how our book could stand out in bookstores. Like there's a lot to this, so you have to treat it like a business. You have to formulate your craft. Like what you write inside the book is part of the process, but it's a smaller part than most people think, right? So the question is,
but it's where so much of the time is spent in a lot of ways, like you said, hours of writing and rewriting and fine tuning illustrations and
So I mean, we've mentioned some pretty good resources here of places that you could learn and go to. I think it's really about figuring that out. I mean, you know, there's so many opportunities in the marketing world and good events out there on how to market a book specifically. You know, I happen to mention Ryan because, you know, some of the things that we've learned from him, it's been great, like working with him on his finances. He works with us on our, you know, on the things that we're doing. AJ is someone that I'm working with her right now on the refinement of the book and this editing process, and she is just so gifted and brilliant.
And she has workshops. AJ Harper, if you just go to her website, she has great workshops that you can join. I think she's still doing them virtually. Yeah,
she is. And you know, like I said, Scribe, I went to theirs. It was fantastic. So really, you've got to emphasize and start learning about the marketing process, and you might be limited to where you can take that. So the question is, who would work with you? Who has been forever changed by your book or loves it or becomes that catalyst? And if you can find them and collaborate with them, it's absolutely a game changer. Now, I think we have a second half of this question, right?
Yeah, the first one was a question from Josh. David also wrote in about IP. So we're going to transition. So once you have this product, once you have it out into the world, like how do you protect it through intellectual property, and when do you do that? So David is just wondering about the pros and the cons of doing the work up front and then scaling it and setting up the tax benefits of having an IP company. Does that make sense?
Okay, so like I have an intellectual property company called Ripwater, and it owns the intellectual property, and then I can license that to companies I'm either a partner with or companies that I can have a relationship with where I can get licensing fees. And so I always look at, you know, if you have no profit coming in, I would get profitable. And with those profits, like as soon as you can take any of those profits and then build that intellectual property company, that's great. Like I didn't set up my intellectual property company until 2012, even though Killing Sacred Cows was released in, you know, 2008. One is I wasn't thinking towards, you know, intellectual property. There was an attorney, Denise Gosnell, that pushed me towards that. There was this a mentor of mine, Roy Williams from the Wizard of Ads, you know, and the Wizard Academy, that really pushed me towards it. And it's been great because now I have this place where I can create and where I can protect and where I could license. And you know, so I've got a little bit of like royalty income, which is very tax efficient. I've also got, you know, protection from a liability standpoint by having that company. I've also separated it so it's not just collapsed into anything that I do. So it actually helps with asset protection and even valuation from that standpoint. So yes, it's a good idea. I wouldn't, you know, borrow money to do that. But if you have profitability, go ahead and set up that type of a corporation right away. And then you can start building and having, you know, at my first company, Garrett, Gunderson, LLC, was the incubator for this kind of stuff. And eventually there was multiple, you know, incomes coming in from different things I was doing. So then I finally set up the, you know, the IP company that's kind of the big picture holding company for everything else that I do.
Have all of the books that you've written been a part of your IP?
Well, Garrett Gunderson LLC had New Rules to Get Rich. It had Killing Sacred Cows, and those royalties still go into there because it was before I set up Ripwater, right? And ultimately, I had a separate entity for Portal to Genius because really there was so much of that was Leslie's intellectual property and her framework and everything, and I was just filling in the gaps with like actual, stories and lessons and things that were really useful. But I actually now allowed them to just have that intellectual property, right? They still acknowledge me on the book and those kind of things, but they're kind of still running with it. 5-day weekend was done through Ripwater for my portion of it. It was really Nick Halleck's concept and his book, and I was the one that came in and again filled in the nuts and the bolts and the details so that the reader could know practically what to do because he's got such a big vision. And then, everything else from there is done through Ripwater. And, I have a book called The Money Tree that we did a licensing deal with Gildan Media as the publisher. I have a book, The Keys to Abundant Life, that I've only used as a bonus. Never really sold that book. That's a Ripwater entity. So, Ripwater, as soon as, like some places would have redone the terms, but I had really good terms. So I just left it as is in Garrett Gunderson LLC and moved everything else to Ripwater.
Yeah, so that's a good point too, where there's not everything you create doesn't have to be a part of your IP.
Right.
Right. So not every workbook that you've created has been a part of that.
I didn't move all those workbooks over because they just don't have the same value. It's kind of like a banana on the shelf. It loses, it starts to get rotten. So if I'm not consistently updating, we're on, I think, version 3 of Killing Sacred Cows now. It's been nice. It hasn't had to have much change, because there's certain foundational principles.
Yeah.
But there were also ways that I was too redundant early on, or that we could simplify, or that we could, the biggest complaint I got from that book is, great, I know how to avoid mistakes now, and I know what the myths are, but how do I put this all together? So version 3 was all about, let's give them resources to put it together because, I listened to feedback. Early on in that book, that feedback was painful. I was frail and fragile to a certain degree. Now I'm like, oh, it just means that, I could actually do better because I tried to do too much alone, or I didn't know all this. I didn't have all the solutions at that time. And if it's a valid feedback that's not just telling me I'm an a-hole, then great. Let's go ahead and listen to it and improve it. So
are there any cons that people should be aware of before they consider setting up an intellectual property company?
Sometimes books that are written are more of a cathartic experience for the individual, not really meant to be something to give to the world. Everything doesn't have to be in bookstores. I mean, we've got back when I wrote my first book, there wasn't nearly as many books that there are today. There's just so many, programs like, there's Self-Publishing School with Chandler. There's just a lot more people that are now writing books without much of a marketing plan, without much of a, they're not full-time authors. Other people are writing a book, like I said, as a business card. Other people are writing this book because it's an experience for them to really deeply understand how they feel and the emotions that they went through to put that on paper. And they may or may not decide to share that with the world. Like my wife and I have been really working on this legacy book, which is like our kind of like, personal lives and growing up and lessons we learned and experiences we had. And there's a lot of humor there. And then there's us coming together because maybe we'll give that to the world, and maybe we'll give like ways that they can apply this in their own lives, and we can kind of have a voice where they weren't able to say these things to their children, and then hopefully it sparks conversation. Or maybe it's just for my kids and grandkids and relatives and close friends. We don't know yet, right? Yeah. But we've been working on it, outlining it, and so it's important to know, why are you doing the book in the first place? Like, what's the purpose? What are you looking for? What do you want the book to do? Who is the audience? And I think we, one time I was like, oh, Killing Sacred Cows to be for everyone, but it's not really for everyone. Like the book I'm working on right now, if you're highly, highly affluent, it's not for you. I'm looking more and more to impact the people that don't have a voice, that don't have an understanding, that don't get these rules, that don't have access, and really give them resources so that they can be unlocked and not trapped in this kind of world where everything's about trading time for money and sacrificing today for tomorrow. But then they get to tomorrow and find out sacrifice become a way of life. And it's really exciting to unlock that for people that were like I was, growing up in a small coal mining town as a coal miner's son. And, I just had a profound experience with my dad where he said, I just think I'm here for more. And how cool is that someone in their, later 60s is feeling that and feeling rejuvenated. That's what that's so for, much. Right? Yeah, like that's what it means. Right. So,
yeah. Does, one other question, just to answer David's last question here is, what are the tax benefits of an IP company?
Or you can have royalty income rather than maybe W-2 income, which might avoid some self-employment tax. COVID. No. No, just a dry throat here. I need to drink
I know,
more
isn't that the crazy?
water.
Like if you have a tickle or a cough, you could just get stared down.
My mom was speaking at my uncle's funeral and coughed and just said it, COVID, and just everybody started laughing. You know, it's not something to joke about, but it's kind of, in those tense moments, can kind of release. So you can have valuation improvement because you're separated this out. So when you're getting a licensing fee, that's 1099, and you don't have that self-employment tax. That could be super helpful. There may be some tax benefits that have gone away, at least in the United States, where you could depreciate some of your intellectual property. It seems like that's now going on a capital loss versus just against ordinary income. So that's not quite the same benefit, but just that one alone of self-employment tax can make a huge difference. So, and ultimately, like I said, boosting the value of it and protecting it so that if you sold a company, it doesn't automatically move all that over with it. And maybe you can still have your licensing agreements.
Okay.
All right. Well, turn your thoughts into profits, build the life you love. Want to master your money? Want to figure out the things that you could do to improve your finances? Click here and check out more videos like this on Money Matters.